Well, I hope that you're doing well. I hope that you've had a good day today and that you're excited to study the Bible for the next few minutes. I know that there are several people that are sick or hurting, and we certainly want to be mindful of those individuals and be praying for them. For those of us who attend Eastwood in person, we know exactly who those people are. For the sake of privacy, I won't say their names online, but we know who they are. So let's be praying for those individuals. If we don't know that you're sick or hurting, please let us know so we can be praying for you. I don't think we have any announcements tonight, so we can go ahead and jump into it. We're in Revelation chapter 4, and this is where things sort of start to ramp up in the book of Revelation. And what I mean by that is as far as interpretation goes, relatively it's been sort of easy. It hasn't been all that difficult. Now we move into a part where interpretation gets a bit more challenging, trying to understand the meaning of the symbols is a bit more difficult because the symbols are more complex than they've been previously in the book. Remember, chapters 2 and 3 were about the 7 churches, and now we're moving to heaven in chapters 4 and 5. After this, of course, this being John, I looked, this is Revelation chapter 4, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here and I will show you what must take place after this." This isn't the first time that we've talked about the trumpet in the book of Revelation. The sound of a trumpet is very distinctive. It's something that can catch somebody's attention, whether you're ready or not. If you're not ready, it's going to be very startling. But if you are ready, you're going to be able to know the instrument. Distinctiveness. That's what we need to think. But after this, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. The way that this is written is, I saw a door standing open and it continued to stay open. It's not that John was being, invited to go through this door and then this door would shut. And the first voice which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit. Now, this is not the first time that John has said he was in the Spirit. Okay, we've read about that previously when he was in the Spirit when? Do you remember? On the Lord's Day. So maybe this is a continuation of that, or perhaps this is just sort of similar in nature. But at once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, with one seated on the throne. So notice that John has been invited to heaven, and then he is able to ascend to heaven. We first said when we started studying the book of Revelation that one of the main markings of Jewish apocalyptic literature, for that matter, is it involves some type of heavenly ascent. Well, okay, here it is. But in terms of Jewish apocalyptic literature, at the time in which John would have been writing, this heavenly ascent is a bit different. Because in some Jewish apocalyptic works, when one was invited to heaven and they were finally able to ascend into heaven, they didn't just get access, to the throne room of God, right? They had to do something extra. They had to be challenged. They had to go through several types of gates. But here, John is just given straight access to the throne room of God. And behold, a throne stood in heaven with one seated on the throne. He who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. So notice that this is all John says about the one who is sitting on the throne. The Jews were very careful not to be very descriptive in reflecting on God. They didn't try to describe his form. John doesn't even say the name of God here. He just says, and he who sat there had the appearance of jasper. In the ancient world, there were many different types, we might say, kinds of jasper. Here we're probably thinking about some type of jasper that was translucent in nature, right? One that was very clear, that when if you were to polish it, it would be very shiny and spectacular. So he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, but carnelian is a precious stone that if you were to hold it in your hand, it would resemble a kindled fire. Right? So what might we be thinking of here? Perhaps John is thinking about, in one sense, the holiness and the purity of God. And in another sense, he's thinking about the wrath of God that will be sent forth by God in order to destroy sin and those who practice sin. Certainly that matches with our understanding of God throughout Scripture and his nature. But and around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. I don't think there's much debate on what does the rainbow symbolize that is suspended above the throne of God. Our minds ought to go back to the book of Genesis, right? And we think about God setting the bow in the sky as a sign of his covenant that he would not what? That no matter how wicked mankind might become in the future, he will never again destroy the world by means of a flood. The rainbow became a sign of mercy. We know, however, the rainbow has many colors, but here this rainbow has the appearance of an emerald. It's green in its color. Perhaps providing John with a sense of peace and calmness. John has been given a glimpse into the purity and holiness of God, but he's also been given a glimpse into the wrathful side of God toward sin. But perhaps he's given comfort here. He's given encouragement that a bow is suspended above the throne of God, so as to remind us that God always acts and God always rules with mercy in mind. We need to make this point known, okay? John is attempting, okay? That's the key word here. John is attempting to describe the grandness of the vision that he is experiencing. But the finite nature of the human language cannot describe with full accuracy the infinite realities of heaven. So let's remember, as we read this, John is doing his best to describe what it is that he is experiencing, and he's doing it through poetic symbolism. But let's remember that although he uses earthly analogies to describe these heavenly realities, the heavenly realities always far surpass the earthly realities that John is describing. Around the throne, there were 24 thrones, and seated on those thrones were 24 elders clothed in white garments with golden crowns on their heads. This is where interpretation gets a bit difficult. Who are these 24 elders specifically? My guess is as good as yours, and your guess is as good as anybody else's. Perhaps 12 thrones refer to the 12 thrones of the patriarchs and 12 thrones of the 12 apostles. So you have sort of the all-encompassing Old Testament and New Testament. You have unity and continuity. But that's a guess. We know that elders in the Old Testament acted as representatives for the people of God. So it does seem that there's unity, right? I've already said that. But this is all-encompassing imagery. It's not just describing 24 people specifically. It's describing in its totality, I think, the worshipers of God, but they're clothed in white garments. These are garments that would have been worn by kingly priests, right? White garments reflective of purity, but white garments reflective of victory. And of course you have the golden crown on their heads, that in a sense these are rulers, right? And from the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings and of thunder. And before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was, as it were, a sea of glass like crystal. These visible and audible manifestations of God are something that we have seen before, right? When God shows up, there's lightning and there's thunder. That's how he chooses to manifest himself. Sometimes in Hebrew poetry, a thunderstorm is reflective of the power of God. And before the throne, there was, as it were, a sea of glass like crystal. So as to tell us that while John is experiencing the grandness of the throne room of God, he is still in a sense separated by this stone-like pavement that can be described as a sea of glass like crystal. There's still distance between John and God. But it's likened to a sea of glass. Does that strike you as a bit odd? That a sea could be described as glass. The sea is very rough. Even when the waves are calm, there's still little waves and ripples in the water. But here you have total calmness. Why? Because something so chaotic as the sea can be calmed by God. Because the one who sits on the throne is supreme. He is sovereign, and he controls not only the elements of the world, but also the elements of heaven. Everything is controlled by him and him alone. And around the throne, well, this is probably a good place to stop because we're not going to be able to finish. So we'll stop here and we will pick back up next week. If you will, finish reading that chapter before you stop. Go ahead and get the immediate context of the chapter. And if you want, it would be good to go ahead and read chapter 5 as well, because they sort of go hand in hand. So we'll stop here. We'll pick back up next week. Hope you have a great rest of the week. God bless.